One small act of kindness. One unknown stranger. She helped him without asking his name, never imagining that the man she saved that night was a billionaire prince, and that her kindness would change her life forever. Before we continue, please like this video, subscribe to this channel and tell us where you're watching from in the comment section. In a quiet neighborhood at the edge of the city, where the streets were cracked and the houses leaned with age, lived a young woman named Zainab. Life had never been gentle with her. Poverty had followed her like a shadow, and hardship had become her closest companion. Yet, in a world that had given her very little, Zainab carried something rare, an unshakable kindness that refused to die. Every morning before the sun fully rose, Zainab stepped out of her small one-room apartment with a worn bag slung over her shoulder. The room she rented was barely enough to stand in comfortably, with peeling paint and a mattress laid directly on the floor. Still, she kept it clean because dignity mattered to her, even when comfort was scarce. She worked long hours doing odd jobs, cleaning houses, washing clothes, selling fruits by the roadside when she could. Some days she earned enough to eat twice. Other days, she went to bed with nothing but water and hope. Yet no matter how empty her pockets were, her heart remained open. When elderly neighbors needed help carrying water, she helped. When children cried from hunger, she shared what little food she had. When people spoke harshly to her, she answered with silence instead of bitterness. Zainab believed that cruelty multiplied when returned, but kindness had a way of finding its way back. That evening, the sky darkened faster than usual. Heavy clouds gathered, threatening rain. Zainab had just finished selling the last of her fruits and counted her earnings carefully. It wasn't much, just enough to buy a small loaf of bread and a bowl of soup from a roadside vendor. She wrapped the bread carefully, knowing it would be her only meal. As she walked home, her sandals splashed through shallow puddles, and the streetlights flickered weakly above her. The city was quieter now, the kind of quiet that made footsteps sound louder and loneliness feel heavier. Then she saw him. At first, she thought it was a bundle of discarded clothes lying by the roadside. People often dumped unwanted things there. But as she drew closer, she noticed movement. Slow, painful movement. A man lay slumped against a broken concrete barrier. His head bowed, his breathing shallow. Zainab stopped. Fear crept into her chest. People warned girls like her never to stop at night, never to trust strangers, never to get involved. She looked around. The street was nearly empty. No one else had noticed him, or perhaps they had chosen not to. She took a step back. Then she saw the blood. It stained the side of his shirt, dark and unmistakable. His face was pale, his body trembling slightly, as if he were fighting to stay conscious. Zainab's heart pounded. She was poor. She was tired. She had nothing to give. But she also knew what it felt like to be invisible, to be left behind. Slowly, she knelt beside him. "Sir," she called softly. "Can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and glassy. His lips parted, but no words came out. She hesitated only for a moment. Carefully, she tore a piece of cloth from her scarf and pressed it gently against his wound. Her hands shook, but she kept going, whispering calming words she wasn't even sure he could hear. "You'll be okay," she murmured. "Just stay awake." Zainab looked around again, hoping someone, anyone, would help. But the street remained indifferent. So she made a decision that would change her life forever. She struggled to lift him, her small frame straining under his weight. It took effort, patience, and sheer determination, but she managed to support him enough to help him walk, step by step, toward her apartment. Rain began to fall. By the time they reached her place, both of them were soaked. Zainab unlocked the door and guided him inside, laying him carefully on her mattress. She lit a small lamp, its weak glow filling the room. She cleaned his wound with water, apologizing softly whenever he groaned in pain. Then she remembered the bread in her bag. She hesitated. That bread was all she had. Slowly, she broke it in half. She soaked one part in warm water to soften it and brought it to his lips. Please eat, she said gently. You need strength. He looked at her, then really looked at her. Confusion, gratitude, and disbelief flickered in his eyes. You don't know me, he whispered. She gave a small smile. You're human. That's enough. He ate slowly. Zainab didn't touch her own portion. Instead, she poured him water and sat nearby, watching to make sure his breathing remained steady. That night, as the rain continued to fall outside, Zainab sat on the cold floor beside her mattress, wrapped in a thin cloth. Hunger gnawed at her, but she ignored it. Sleep tried to claim her, but she fought it, afraid to leave him unattended. She didn't know his name. She didn't know where he came from. She didn't know that the man lying helplessly in her tiny room was a billionaire prince, one of the most powerful heirs in the country, a man whose absence had already sent an entire palace into panic. All she knew was that someone needed help. And she had helped. Outside, the rain washed the streets clean, as if the world itself was being reset. And in that quiet, unnoticed act of kindness, destiny shifted, silently, powerfully, forever. The night grew quieter after Zainab led the stranger into her tiny room. It was hardly a room at all, just one narrow space at the back of an old compound, with cracked walls, a thin mattress on the floor, and a single bulb that flickered whenever the wind blew. Yet to her, it was the only place that had ever truly belonged to her. She helped the stranger sit down slowly. He winced, but he didn't complain. Please, sit here, she said softly, spreading an old cloth on the mattress. I'll clean the wound. He watched her closely as she moved, the careful way she poured water, the gentle way her fingers worked, the patience in her silence. Most people would have been frightened or suspicious. But Zainab acted as though helping him was the most natural thing in the world. You're not afraid of me? He asked quietly. She paused, then smiled faintly. I've learned that fear doesn't heal anyone. That answer stayed with him. She cleaned the cut on his arm using salt water and a clean piece of fabric torn from her own scarf. He noticed it but said nothing. When she was done, she wrapped it neatly. You should rest, she said. You've lost some blood. And you? He asked. You've done so much already. I'm used to it, she replied. Life doesn't wait for rest. Her words carried weight. Not bitterness but truth. Zainab moved to a small wooden shelf and brought out a bowl of rice and beans she had saved from earlier that day. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. She placed it before him. He stared at the food for a moment. This is your dinner, he said. You shouldn't give it to me. She shook her head. I already ate. 'Twas a lie, but a kind one. Slowly he began to eat. Every movement was controlled, disciplined. Not the behavior of a man used to hunger. Zainab noticed, but she didn't question it. She never asked questions that could make people uncomfortable. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of crickets filling the space between them. Finally he spoke. Why are you kind like this? He asked. Even when you have so little. Zainab thought for a moment. Because I know what it feels like to be ignored, she said. When you're in pain and the world walks past you, it breaks something inside. I don't want to be the person who adds to that pain. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and for the first time that night, his calm expression cracked slightly. You speak like someone who has suffered, he said. She smiled sadly. Suffering teaches you things no school ever can. They began to talk after that. Not about names or origins but about life. She told him about growing up poor, about losing her parents too young, about learning to survive by working small jobs and helping others. She spoke of her dreams quietly, almost shyly. Finishing school someday, having a small business, living a life where she wouldn't have to beg for dignity. He listened without interrupting. When it was his turn, he spoke carefully. He talked about responsibility, about being watched, about living a life where expectations crushed freedom. He spoke of loneliness hidden behind success, of nights where wealth could not buy peace. Zainab frowned slightly. You speak like someone who has everything, yet nothing at the same time. He smiled, a slow, thoughtful smile. Sometimes, he said, The higher you stand, the lonelier it becomes. She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she felt the sadness behind his words. You're very intelligent, she said. You don't speak like most people. And you, he replied, don't live like most people. The rain outside softened to a whisper. Hours passed without them realizing. At some point, exhaustion pulled at her eyes. She noticed him struggling to stay awake too. You should sleep, she said, pointing to the mattress. I'll sit by the door. He shook his head. No, you've done enough. I can manage here. After a brief argument, they agreed to share the space. He resting on the mattress, she sitting against the wall with her back straight, as if standing guard. Before sleep took him, he spoke again. You didn't ask for my name, he said. She smiled gently. If you wanted me to know it, you would have told me. That answer stayed with him too. Before dawn, the sky slowly lightened. Zainab woke to find him standing quietly, adjusting his jacket. His wound looked better. His posture was stronger. You're leaving? She asked, surprised. Yes, he said softly. Before the day begins. She stood up quickly. Will you be all right? He nodded. Because of you, yes. He reached into his pocket, then stopped. Whatever he had intended to give her. He changed his mind. Thank you, he said instead, and his voice carried a depth that made her heart ache. You saved my life. She shook her head. I only did what anyone should. He smiled, truly smiled this time. No, he said. Not everyone would have. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. Zainab, he said, remembering her name. Kindness like yours doesn't disappear into the world unnoticed. Then he was gone. Zainab stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty doorway, not knowing why her heart felt heavier, or why it felt strangely hopeful. She had helped a stranger. She had no idea that before long, that stranger would return. And nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Morning arrived with urgency in a place far removed from Zainab's quiet compound. At the heart of the city, beyond high iron gates and manicured gardens, the royal residence was in chaos. Black SUVs rolled in and out of the palace grounds. Guards spoke in hurried tones. Phones rang non-stop. Advisors gathered in tense clusters, their faces tight with fear they tried to hide. The reason was simple. The prince was missing. Prince Kelechi Adigwe, heir to one of the most powerful royal business dynasties in the country, a billionaire whose investments stretched across continents, had vanished the previous night. His guards stood at attention in the grand hall as the chief of security paced back and forth. He dismissed his escort, one guard reported. Said he needed air. He never returned. That has never happened before, an advisor snapped. Never. The king sat silently on his throne, his fingers pressed together. He had raised his son to be disciplined, careful, always protected. Kelechi did not disappear without reason. Find him, the king finally commanded. His voice was calm but dangerous. I want every street checked, every hospital, every camera reviewed. Orders flew instantly. None of them knew how close they had already come. Hours earlier, as dawn crept across the city, Kelechi had walked away from a narrow compound wearing the same plain suit he'd worn the night before. No guards, no driver, no royal crest. Just a man with a bandaged arm, and a heart that refused to settle. As he walked, images replayed in his mind. Zainab tearing her scarf without hesitation. Zainab giving away her only meal. Zainab listening, truly listening without knowing who he was. In his world, people bowed before they spoke. They calculated every word. Every smile hid an expectation. But that girl had wanted nothing. And that unsettled him more than any palace intrigue ever had. At the edge of the street, a familiar black SUV slowed beside him. The driver's door opened immediately. You're high, the man began, then stopped when Kelechi raised his hand. Not here, Kelechi said quietly. The guards stepped out anyway, relief written plainly on their faces. "We've been searching everywhere," one said. "The king is." "I know," Kelechi replied. "I'll return." As he entered the vehicle, the door closed softly behind him, sealing him back into a world of power, wealth, and expectation. But something inside him had already changed. Back at the palace, his return caused an eruption of voices. "Where did you go?" an advisor demanded. "You put the entire kingdom on edge," another added. "The press nearly caught wind of it," someone else warned. Kelechi listened without reacting. Only when the king stood did the room fall silent. "Speak," his father said. "Where were you last night?" Kelechi met his gaze steadily. "I was reminded," he said, choosing his words carefully, "that there is a world beyond these walls." The king studied him. "And did this reminder nearly cost you your life?" Kelechi glanced at his bandaged arm. "Someone saved it," he answered simply. That was all he said. But later, alone in his private chamber, the noise of the palace fading into the distance, Kelechi allowed himself to think freely. He sat by the window overlooking the city, the skyline glowing in the early sun. From this height everything looked small, controlled, manageable. Yet somewhere down there, a girl lived in a room barely large enough to breathe in, yet she had given him something the palace never had. Kindness without calculation. He closed his eyes and remembered her voice. "Fear doesn't heal anyone." For the first time in years, Prince Kelechi Adigwe felt something stir that had nothing to do with duty or legacy. Connection. Meanwhile, Zainab woke that morning to the sound of neighbors preparing for the day. She stretched slowly, her body sore from the night spent sitting against the wall. The room felt emptier than it had before. She stared at the folded cloth where the stranger had slept. "It was just one night," she whispered to herself. "Just a stranger." Yet her heart disagreed. As she stepped outside to begin another long day of work, she didn't notice the black sedan parked briefly at the far end of the street, or the man inside it watching her quietly through tinted glass. Kelechi observed her for a long moment. The way she greeted an old woman passing by. The way she helped a child lift a heavy bucket. The way she smiled, even as she carried the weight of survival on her shoulders. His driver waited silently. Finally Kelechi spoke. "Find out everything about her," he said. "But don't let her know." "Yes, sir." As the car pulled away, Kelechi leaned back, his thoughts steady and certain. He had returned to the palace. But he had not left her behind. Because some kindnesses do not fade with daylight. And some strangers are never truly forgotten. Zainab did not see him again for days. Life returned to its familiar rhythm. Long hours, tired hands, and quiet endurance. She told herself the stranger had been just a passing moment, a brief interruption in a life that rarely changed. Yet at night, she still found herself staring at the doorway, half expecting him to appear with that calm voice and thoughtful eyes. Then, one afternoon everything changed. The narrow street trembled under the sound of engines. Zainab paused mid-step, a basin of water balanced on her head, as sleek black cars rolled slowly into her neighborhood. They were polished, expensive, utterly out of place among cracked walls and dusty paths. Neighbors gathered, whispering in confusion. Who are they looking for? Is someone in trouble? The cars stopped. Uniformed guards stepped out first, standing in perfect formation. Then a door opened, and he stepped out. Zainab's heart skipped. It was the same man, but also not. Gone was the quiet, unremarkable stranger. In his place stood a man dressed in tailored luxury, his posture regal, his presence commanding. The suit fit him like it had been crafted by destiny itself. A subtle emblem gleamed on his cuff. Reality struck her like a wave. Her knees weakened. He walked toward her, his gaze softening the moment it met hers. "Zainab," he said gently. Her hands trembled as she lowered the basin. You lied to me," she whispered, confusion and disbelief colliding in her chest. "I hid the truth," he corrected softly. "To protect what was real." Guards watched silently. Neighbors stared in awe. "I am Prince Kelechi Adigwe," he said. "And I came back because I promised myself I wouldn't forget you." The world seemed to tilt. "A prince," she breathed. "A billionaire." She stepped back instinctively, suddenly aware of her worn clothes, her bare feet, the poverty she could not escape. "This must be a mistake," she said quickly. "Someone like you shouldn't be here." "Not for me." Kelechi shook his head. "I was never more myself than the night you helped me," he replied. "Titles didn't matter then. They don't now." But Zainab felt the distance rise between them, an invisible wall built from status, fear and doubt. "I'm not meant for your world," she said quietly. "I don't belong there." The palace gates opened to her days later. Stepping inside felt like entering another universe. Marble floors gleamed. Chandeliers shimmered overhead. Servants moved with practiced grace. Every eye followed her. Whispers followed faster. "That's her. She's the one. A common girl." Zainab felt each word like a sting. Some looked curious. Others looked offended. And some looked dangerous. From an upper balcony, Princess Zara watched in silence, her lips pressed into a thin line. She had known the prince her whole life, and she had never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at that girl. "She doesn't belong," Zara murmured to an advisor beside her. "And she will not stay." At dinner that evening, conversations paused whenever Zainab moved. She kept her head low, her heart pounding. Kelechi noticed. He leaned toward her and whispered, "Ignore the noise." "I don't know how," she admitted. "Then let me carry it for you," he said. But the whispers grew louder. Staff murmured behind closed doors. Nobles questioned her presence. Advisors warned of public perception. "She will damage your image. The people will talk. The council will not approve." Kelechi listened, and refused to bend. Yet in the shadows, jealousy began to sharpen its claws. Princess Zara's gaze followed Zainab wherever she went, cold and calculating. That night, as Zainab stood by the palace window, staring out at a world she never imagined entering, her heart ached with fear. She had been saved once. But now she wondered if the palace would break her in ways the streets never could. Because when royalty returns, kindness is tested. And not everyone welcomes the truth it brings. Zainab learned quickly that entering the palace did not mean entering peace. From the moment she arrived, she was no longer just a girl who had helped a stranger. She became a question, rumor, a problem that needed solving. And the royal family decided to test her. Not openly, not kindly, but carefully and cruelly. The first test came disguised as courtesy. She was invited to breakfast with the extended royal household, a long table dressed in gold-trimmed china, crystal glasses, and polished silverware she had never seen before. Zainab sat quietly at the far end, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight, her heart pounding. Conversation flowed around her, but none of it included her. "Education reveals character," one aunt said loudly. "Breeding even more so," another replied, her eyes flicking toward Zainab. Zainab lowered her gaze, pretending not to hear. When the meal was served, she reached for the cutlery, unsure of which to use. A soft chuckle rose from across the table. "Perhaps she prefers eating with her hands," someone whispered. Heat rushed to her cheeks. Still she said nothing. She ate slowly, carefully, refusing to let embarrassment turn into anger. That was the first time the king noticed her. Not because she was awkward but because she was restrained. The second test came through labor. A senior lady of the palace summoned her late in the afternoon. "You should help in the West Wing," she said coolly. "It will teach you humility." Zainab nodded without complaint. For hours she carried heavy linens, scrubbed marble floors until her hands burned, and polished furniture already shining. Servants watched, unsure whether to pity or resent her. At dusk the lady returned. "You may rest," she said. "You have done enough." Zainab bowed her head politely. "Thank you." No protest, no tears, No bitterness. The king observed from a distance. A girl raised by hardship, yet she worked without resentment. Interesting. The third test was the harshest. At a formal gathering, a noblewoman stepped forward, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Tell us," she said, smiling thinly, "what exactly do you intend to gain from the prince's kindness?" The room went silent. All eyes turned to Zainab. This was the moment many expected her to beg, to defend herself, to plead her innocence. She did none of those things. Zainab lifted her head calmly. "I didn't help him because of who he was," she said softly. "I helped him because he was hurt." A murmur swept through the hall. "I didn't know he was a prince," she continued. "And even if I had known, it wouldn't have changed what I did." Her voice did not shake. "If my presence offends anyone," she added, "I can leave. I will not force myself into a place where I am unwanted." Prince Kelechi stepped forward instantly. "That will not be necessary," he said firmly. But before he could say more, the king raised his hand. Silence returned. The king studied Zainab carefully. Not the clothes she wore. Not her background. Not the whispers around her. He studied her eyes. They held no greed. No desperation. No calculation. Only dignity. That night the king asked quietly, "Where did you learn such restraint?" Zainab answered honestly, "Life teaches you when you have no choice." The king nodded slowly. For the first time since she arrived, his expression softened. He did not announce acceptance. He did not offer approval. But as Zainab left the room, he said something no one expected. "Kindness," the king murmured to himself, "often reveals more royalty than blood ever could." From that moment the palace balance shifted. The tests were not over. But the king had begun to see her, not as a burden, not as a threat, but as a young woman whose character could not be bought, broken, or bent. And that realization would change everything. The palace was buzzing with whispers, tension, and expectation. Every eye seemed to be on Prince Kelechi Adigwe, waiting to see what he would do. For weeks, the kingdom had watched quietly as a common girl, Zainab, stepped into the corridors of power, not with arrogance, but with a quiet dignity that unsettled the rigid hierarchy. Kelechi knew that the decision he was about to make would ripple far beyond the palace walls. Tradition demanded caution. Royals did not choose freely. Marriages were arranged, alliances were weighed, and public opinion mattered more than personal feelings. But he could no longer ignore his heart. He found Zainab in the garden that evening, her hands lightly brushing over the blooms she tended quietly, as she often did. She looked up when he approached, startled at first, but her expression softened when she saw the determination in his eyes. "Zainab," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I have spent my life following rules, following expectations. But I cannot follow them this time, not when it asks me to turn away from what is true." She swallowed, unsure what he meant. "I am a prince," he continued, "bound by duty and tradition. But I also know what it feels like to be seen for who I truly am. And that is what I see in you. Your kindness, your strength, your heart." Zainab felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Kelechi, I don't belong here. I never asked for this. I don't belong in your world." He shook his head gently. "It is not about belonging. It is about respect, trust, and the truth of who you are. And that truth is enough." The next day, the palace gathered for a formal council. Advisors, nobles, and family members filled the grand hall, all curious, some skeptical, some openly disapproving. The air was thick with tension as the king entered, followed by Kelechi. Kelechi stepped forward, placing himself at the center of the hall. Every eye followed him as he spoke with calm authority. "I will not hide my actions or my intentions," he said. "Zainab is not here because she is a common girl. She is here because her character deserves recognition. She helped me when no one else would. She acted without expectation, without fear, and without pride. That is a quality worthy of honor." The hall fell silent. Some muttered among themselves, Others looked at him in shock. The king leaned forward, studying Zainab carefully. His voice was measured but firm. "Indeed," he said. "She has proven her character through action, not position. She has been tested in our home and has shown dignity, courage, and humility. Those are qualities far more valuable than bloodlines alone." There was a pause. Then slowly he nodded. "She shall remain here. Not as a guest. Not as someone rescued. But as someone respected. And she shall be given the education and opportunities that will allow her to build her own future." Tears welled in Zainab's eyes, not from gratitude alone, but from the sheer relief of being seen. Not for her status, not for appearances, but for who she truly was. Kelechi stepped beside her, his hand brushing lightly against hers. "You deserve everything," he whispered. "And I will stand by you as long as I live." For the first time in her life, Zainab felt the weight of possibility settle around her like a warm cloak. She would continue her studies, learn, grow, and rise. Not because a prince had rescued her, but because the world had finally recognized the strength and kindness she carried all along. Palace too began to change. Whispers of doubt turned into curiosity, and curiosity slowly shifted into respect. Those who had judged her harshly now observed quietly, realizing that some power is not inherited, it is earned through heart and action. In the months that followed, tutors arrived to guide her studies. Opportunities she never imagined opened before her. Her place in the palace was secure, not because she was a princess, but because she had proven her worth. And Kelechi, he never left her side. Not as a prince, not as a figurehead, but as someone who had seen her when no one else did, and had chosen to honor that truth. The choice had been his, tradition or love. But in the end, he realized that love is not always about titles, wealth, or status. It is about recognition, respect, and courage. And in that choice, 2 lives were forever changed. Kindness is never wasted. Sometimes, the help you give in your lowest moment becomes the doorway to your greatest destiny. Treat everyone with compassion. You never know whose life you're touching. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a like. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next captivating story filled with love, lessons, and unforgettable moments. Until our next story.